My name is Tim Barnes. I am the Director of UCL Advances, which is the Centre for Entrepreneurship here at UCL. And at some point over the last 12, 13 years or so, I have stood up in front of what I estimate to be about 10,000 people and given them some idea of what it is to try and start a business, to help them with business planning, to help them think through the kind of ideas that make sense of a business opportunity and the sort of tools they need to assess that. Which is why it was sort of appropriate, I think, for a day like this, that we thought we would consider the question, can entrepreneurship be taught? Can you teach entrepreneurship? Is it something that's even worth doing? Now, obviously, from my point of view, there's a huge amount of personal risk, because I spent a decade trying to do this, in some way, shape or form, and there's the opportunity here for me to invalidate everything I've done with one of the most productive periods of my life. Hopefully, that isn't what the conclusion that I'm going to come to, but I'm going to leave that a little bit in the dark for a moment and start with an answer that's only a really partial answer to that question, which is, what does entrepreneurship even mean? And that's a very academic way of addressing things, to talk about the definitions, but I think it is actually appropriate in this particular context. This is the sort of the dictionary definition, for want of a better term, that's used within an academic setting. And what it does is it differentiates between the idea of enterprise and entrepreneurship. Enterprise is all of the skills that you have that you might want to deliver in terms of your work life, in terms of, I don't know, the things that you might want to go and do next, the ability to organize yourself, the ability to be able to stand up and speak in a public forum, the ways to think about things, the analysis tools. Entrepreneurship refers specifically to the area in which we apply those skills to the act of starting a business, setting up a new venture or a new business. So in that context, entrepreneurship is a subset of all the things you do around enterprise. And so when universities and schools talk about entrepreneurship and enterprise, this is an important differentiator in what's there. And the bit that I'm talking about is just that bit that says, can we teach the bit that's helpful about starting a business? And a lot of people try, a lot of institutions, try, universities, schools, programs, things like that, and they try because a lot of people want to learn. I don't know how many of you are interested in the idea of starting a business. In some institutions, it's really very high proportions of people, because entrepreneurship, somewhere along the line in the last few years, became sexy. It used to be the case that if you wanted to do really well with girls at university, you told them you were in a band. Now you tell them you want to start a company. And there's a whole, there's delayed reaction. There's clearly some appreciation for that, which is glorious. And you want to be able to say something interesting about it, and entrepreneurship has become that kind of term. And in that context, with those kinds of motives, that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about the people who think that starting a business is a key element to what they want to do with the majority of their working life. And since the recession of 2008-9, we've seen a large number of people who think that actually starting their own business is, ironically, to many of the people in the previous generation, the secure way of ensuring their future and their long-term prosperity. And that's because as an entrepreneur, you're deemed to have control over yourself and over the tools, your income, the forms of activity that you want to engage in, and you're not as reliant on externals. And we've seen a huge increase in the number of people who want to do that. Now, I'm not entirely sure if 20% or 30% or 40% of people wanting to become entrepreneurs is an entirely good thing. There's a motivational question there. I'm fairly sure that if we got up to 25, 30% of people actually being entrepreneurs, a large number of things in society wouldn't work. We wouldn't have teachers, doctors, people in the armed services. We wouldn't have people who ran big factories. We wouldn't have people who were doing the everyday admin jobs. Not everybody can be somebody who's right to start a business. And so from a teaching point of view, what you're looking for, given the sort of definition I was talking about earlier, are the subset of people who are not only just interested in this because it's sexy, but because they're actually serious about starting a business and they have the capabilities to do it. And this is something that's driving government policy. In the summer of this year, the very handsome gentleman up there on the right, not me, not the one in the jumper, the other handsome gentleman in that particular photo, Lord Young, formerly a UCL alum himself, and now the Prime Minister's Entrepreneurship Advisor, published the third in his series of reports called Enterprise for All, talking about how to promote entrepreneurship in society. And in this particular one, he looked at the ways that we educate for this, and he talked about there being a need for four main areas in which particularly universities, but FE colleges and schools, also engaged with and taught and support entrepreneurship. So this is something that's seen as being at the top of the political agenda. It's seen as something that's incredibly important for society, both by the individuals, those 20% who see that this is the way they need to go in order to have a secure future, and by a government and by a policy-making machine that sees it as the way in which we will ensure economic prosperity for this country, the US, and in everywhere else where entrepreneurship is thought to be important. And it means that you see a large number of programs. My own department here at UCL, UCL Advances, has probably the largest set of support for students who want to start companies, certainly in Europe, we think probably the world. It's a rather hard thing to prove, but I take 2,500 students a year through the basics of how to start a business in some way, shape, or form. We provide help from space, investment, one-to-one advice, and so on, all the extracurricular stuff. We have a master's program in technology entrepreneurship for people who want to go down the formal education route. There's Stanford, similar. London Business School, similar. And people like Peter Jones, ex of Dragon's Den, are doing it with his Peter Jones Academies. So it's going into schools in the same way. This is an important element, but everybody here is basing the idea that what they're doing is about the idea that we can teach entrepreneurship. And yet when you look at it, when you look at the factors that actually enable individuals to go and become successful entrepreneurs, actually it's quite tricky. Is this about nature? Is this about nurture? Is this a learned behavior? Well, it's pretty complicated. I don't know if anybody here has ever taken a Myers-Briggs type test. This is one of the sort of the 16 main type of results you can get out of a Myers-Briggs test, and a piece of research that, well, not research, but an article that appeared in Business Insider. They mapped those characteristics against sort of the top 5 of professions that might exhibit those particular characteristics. And I don't know if you know those, but you have things like being an introvert, an extrovert, being a censor, being a thinker, being a judge, etc. Now, the bit that we're interested in is this bit down the bottom left-hand corner, and it's perhaps slightly symbolic that anything to do with entrepreneurship ends up in the bottom corner. That's how a lot of these things work out where entrepreneurs are concerned. But this means that you are at the top if you're an ENTP. Now, again, if I wasn't being dazzled by the lights or I was actually able to see people on the end of a webcast, I'd perhaps be able to judge how many of you would consider yourself to be in these categories. Those who would see themselves as being an extrovert, intuitive about the way that possibilities seem to exist, would consider themselves a thinker and a perceiver of activity. Now, there may not be a huge amount of relationship in this. The academic evidence, the scientific evidence is somewhat mixed. But the point that's trying to be made is that there could well be the kind of characteristics that are not things that are taught or can be taught. They're things that are innate in us through combination of nature and the way that you grew up long before you got into a formal education system that make you suitable and indeed more likely to end up as an entrepreneur. This is backed by other factors that can occur in your makeup. This research is actually pretty old. It's about 25 years old. But it's been shown over a number of years that if you have ever received a significant gift or inheritance, you have the idea of financial security at some point, or you've been given a single lump sum with which you could go and do something interesting, you're much more likely, you're twice as likely in UK data, it's £5,000 at 1990 prices, to have decided that you wanted to go on and start a business. And when you combine these things, you end up with a story that says there is a huge amount in your background of forming factors in your experience that are at least as likely, if not more, than anything you've been taught to determine whether you can be an entrepreneur. So it sounds at this point as if I'm probably talking myself out of a job. And indeed, the future for this particular type of talk actually gets worse. There is an enormous centre of excellence in this, as much as I wish it was at UCL. It's not. It's unfortunately in some place called Cambridge, where the Centre for Entrepreneurial Learning is doing really interesting things to find out what the successful factors are in the backgrounds of people who go on to become entrepreneurs. And they're finding really big determinants in things like where you grew up, which could be, and I don't just mean by country, but in the UK's case by region, which could be a really quite uncomfortable societal and political message in the UK. We are looking at things like gender. At the age of 12 to 13, boys will tell you that they are absolutely capable of going on to start a business. Girls, slightly less so. By the time that you get to 17 or 18, whereas girls were better than boys and just not very confident about it at that point, or about the same. By the time they get to 17 or 18, and the girls have many more of the skills that they'd need, they're even less confident about saying that they'd be able to start a business than boys, and the boys are much more likely to go and try. So gender plays an enormous part in this as well. So all of these things are coming together to suggest that actually teaching entrepreneurship, overriding what it is that's there, trying to convince somebody who wants to be an entrepreneur that they can be an entrepreneur, is decidedly tricky. So you may have noticed that the starting point for this was, can you teach entrepreneurship? And I have, to be perfectly honest, thus far avoided the question.
And that's because it's hard. Okay? It's a hard question to answer. There is surprisingly limited amounts of scholarship and data to back up the sort of effectiveness that you can gain from teaching it, and that's mainly because of time. It takes a long time to work out if somebody who's being taught things when they're 12, 14, 16, 18 years old, and when they get to retirement at the age of 75, how effective their life and their career has been relative to other people, just because of the length of time the studies take. There are things that are happening, but data is actually quite hard to find. And so to some degree, the conclusion we can reach at this midpoint is that actually you can't make entrepreneurs. You can't say to somebody who doesn't have that innate drive, right, this is how I instill it in you, this is how we light the fire. We can take people who've got that and teach them how to be better at it. We can do things to give them the opportunities to learn that they might not otherwise have. So we can, as my colleague Dave Chapman likes to say, we can teach them the skills that meet the needs of the entrepreneurial imperative. And that means that if you've got that drive inside you, that you really have to go and do something, solve a problem, start a business, make a fortune, if you've got that, then you have the ability to say, right, what do you need to do to make that possible? How are we going to get the best out of what might take place? You therefore find yourself thinking not about the language of taught, but about the language of learning. How do we expose people to some of the things that they need to find, often about themselves, and about the kind of people they are, and about the kind of things that they do, in order to develop as entrepreneurs? It's a bit like, how do you get an apprenticeship in this stuff? And it becomes down to the idea that learning, therefore, looks very different in this space to the way in which taught programs look in almost every other. Is you assemble the building blocks of knowledge throughout the early parts of your life as you go through the formal education system. You assemble the individual blocks that build one upon the other until you reach a point, normally in the case of many of the people here, the point at which you've graduated from university, where you've sort of reached the end of formal education, and it was all building up to a theoretical thing you might one day go and do. Those bottom blocks indicate letters, numbers, which you then assemble into words and into sentences and into understanding. Then you've been able to communicate ideas and whatever kind of specialization it gets up into, and the things that you study as you get higher up. It's to a theoretical endpoint. It's not really clear what it is you might want to be going to do with it next. And then you leave. And you leave formal education and you go out and you do something else. And you might start a business or you might get a job, but your need for learning changes. Because all of a sudden, you're not trying to simply acquire every building block of knowledge that could be out there. There are things you don't need to know. There are things that you don't have time to learn. There are things that you might one day want to come back to, but they're not building towards a converging point in the way that education does up until that element. And instead, what you find yourself doing is saying, I have a problem right now. Can somebody help me explain to me how I get over this problem? How do I solve this now? And instead of trying to learn everything, you find yourself plotting a point to the end of just the things you need to know to be able to get on. Learning isn't about the theoretical accumulation of knowledge anymore. It's about assembling a pathway to a specific outcome. How do I raise money? How do I market my new opportunity? How do I analyze what might be needed next? What sort of people do I hire? And I need different pieces of that learning at different points in time. I need different pieces depending on what it is that I have learnt earlier in my life. I need different pieces depending on all sorts of factors that are very different from assuming that everybody started at the same base plate and everybody needs to learn their letters and their numbers. It started based on experience. And this model for what is known as experiential learning, the idea that instead of getting everybody into large lecture theatres and broadcasting at them, is that they all go and have a go at doing stuff, and then they come back with, well, I always thought I'd be really good at standing up and presenting. I always thought I would be really good at trying to explain the particular problem that I was going to solve. Actually, it turns out I'm not. Or I encountered this thing and all of a sudden I've got to fill in a tax return. What the heck's that all about? That's a joy that many of you have still got to experience, and it's not one I'm going to rush towards you with today. But there's all of these things, and you didn't need to know that when you were down here at the bottom period. You need to know it now. And when you do need it, it's urgent. So the form of learning, the form of engagement that we need to go into with respect to something an entrepreneurship experience is very different indeed. And we see it all the time. It means that these very formulaic ways, maths and computer science, chemistry, things that give you rules, do not apply in the same way when you're trying to deal with entrepreneurship. There is no algorithm for success, as Bill likes to say. And we practice that not only in a university context and with the big companies, but also with some of the kids that we work with. 4 years ago, I set out to do something about this. I wanted to raise the aspiration levels of kids in schools. I wanted to say to them, right, do you know what? You don't have to just take the job that's coming to you or the benefits that are coming to you. You can go out and start a business and change your own future just by deciding to put the hours in and work on it. And we did it by combining kids with lemons. And the lemons weren't just the university students we used for mentoring, they were also just the fruit. And what we came up with was this program called Citrus Saturday, through which we used the model of a lemonade stand to teach basic business skills and entrepreneurship to kids and raise aspirations. And so I want to show you what they learnt out of this, which is, I think, a demonstration that this idea of experience, coming back to it, is something that's successful. And with a bit of luck, we'll have sound. Sound? No sound. There we go.
I learned how to motivate myself. I've learned how to work well with others.
How to set up your own little business, how to pitch to other people.
We're learning how to talk to customers, how to greet people, what goes into making a business.
The risks that you have to take sometimes, and how sometimes they turn out good and sometimes turn out bad.
How to draw people into the business and not drive them away.
Loads of skills about how to sell and how to approach people, especially people that are busy, people that are waiting.
It's cool because I really enjoy business and stuff, so it's good to learn loads of business skills, actually do it hands-on. Because at school you just get taught it, but it's not the same as in actually doing it.
I think after this I would. I think it's helped. Yeah.
I want to be an entrepreneur, that's my ambition. So by taking this, it's one step to me.
I wanted to start my own business when I grow up so I can learn. So this is like an experience. This is so that I can learn new skills for the future, so I can open my own business.
It's just not as hard as you think. It's hard, but it's not as hard.
It was really fun. We earned some money. It was a really good thing to do over the weekend.
I thought it was a good experience. Plus, I'm taking business studies, so it looks quite good on for a referee from us, teacher and stuff.
This is finally a chance for us to be independent and do something.
It's getting involved in everything, which is fun, and it's not about the work that you have to do, but it's fun, it's what matters.
Yeah, we are having fun.
So in the end, my analysis of this is that can you teach entrepreneurship? Well, it's not really an easy question to be able to tackle with an answer. You can't teach someone who doesn't want to be an entrepreneur, but you can help those that want to be one. You can give them places and experiences where they can learn for themselves, where they can take these ideas onwards. You can help them to fail faster, either now or pick up those learning points for the future, and you can help to inspire them. And the final question is just, what are we doing? Are we learning to do this any better? Well, I hope so. So one of the things that is coming this week in a couple of days' time is the public beta of a project which is not yet in the public domain. But the Tech City UK, which has the responsibility for pushing out the whole ethos behind starting tech-based companies in the UK, has partnered with us, and we're providing a platform for learning, a MOOC-type platform, in which we will be pushing out a program of free business skills training for people that want to start tech companies. Content from UCL, Cambridge University, and a private company called Founder-Centric. And the first time that most of you will have heard of this is today. There is a pre-registration site that is up, and there will be a public beta launch by the relevant Minister of State on Wednesday. So it's just basically a sneak preview of what's going to come. The point being, we're trying to learn how to do this better too. And the end is just that. We don't know the answer to the question, can we teach entrepreneurship? But it's pretty clear that we can't inspire it. We can't make it. We can't force it. We can only encourage people who want to do it to learn and to be better and to experience the kind of things that will enable them to be better entrepreneurs in the future. And we too are learning. Thank you very much.